Picture this. It's an ordinary Tuesday. You're making coffee, half awake, staring at the counter while the machine does its thing. The morning light is coming through the window at that exact angle that makes everything feel a little cinematic. You're thinking about nothing in particular. Your to-do list, maybe, or that weird dream you had. And then, for absolutely no reason, a thought drops into your head like a stone into still water. What if this isn't the first time you've been here? Not reincarnation, not déjà vu, something stranger, something that cuts right to the base of what you think you actually means. What if there was a version of you, identical in every measurable way, same memories, same personality, same terrible taste in music? Who lived your life up until some point and then stopped existing? And then you started, and you have no idea it happened. You can't feel the seam. There's no scar. There's no gap in the memory because the memory came with you, preloaded, like a phone that arrives already set up. Would that count as dying? Would you even know? This is not a casual philosophical detour. This question sits at the intersection of neuroscience, physics, philosophy of identity, and the kind of existential dread that pairs very poorly with morning coffee. It's been wrestled with by some of the most rigorous thinkers in human history, and none of them have walked away with a clean answer. So buckle in because we're going somewhere deeply uncomfortable, and the ride is worth every mile. To even approach this question properly, we first have to ask something that sounds almost offensively simple. What are you? Not in the cosmic "who am I really" sense, though that's coming. Don't worry. Right now, just mechanistically, what is the thing that makes you, you? What carries your identity from one moment to the next? The obvious answer is your brain. Your brain contains your memories, your personality, your preferences, your fears, your learned behaviors, your internal voice, your entire experiential history. It's the substrate. Destroy the brain, and by every observable measure, you cease to exist. The body keeps functioning for a moment, maybe, but you, the subjective experiencer, are gone. But here's the first crack in the obvious answer. Your brain is not static. It is not a fixed archive that stores information and runs unchanged until it stops. Your brain is in a state of constant, relentless physical modification. Every experience you have restructures it. Neurons strengthen connections, prune old ones, grow new dendrites, alter their sensitivity thresholds. The physical structure encoding your memory of what you ate for breakfast this morning did not exist in that form yesterday. It was built by the experience of eating breakfast. The architecture is continuously rewritten. The neurons themselves, the cells, turn over. Not as quickly as, say, skin cells, but the molecular machinery inside neurons replaces itself constantly. The proteins that build synapses, the receptors that receive signals, the mitochondria powering every transmission, these have lifespans of days to weeks. The atoms composing those molecules cycle through your body and out into the world on timescales of months to years. There is a scientific sense in which the physical substance of your brain right now is not identical to the physical substance of your brain 7 years ago. The pattern persists. The matter changes. So which one are you? This is the Ship of Theseus problem, and it has been brutalizing philosophers since ancient Greece. The myth goes like this. Theseus had a ship. Over time, as planks rotted and parts wore out, they were replaced, one by one. Eventually, every single component of the ship had been swapped out for a new one. Not a single original piece remained. Question: is it still the Ship of Theseus? Most people, when asked this casually, say yes. It's the same ship. Continuity of form, continuity of function, continuity of history. The ship never stopped being the ship. It just got maintained. But then someone adds a wrinkle. What if someone collected all the original planks as they were removed, and once they had all of them, reassembled the original ship? Now there are two ships. One has unbroken physical continuity of existence. One has complete material originality. Which is the real Ship of Theseus? Apply this to your body, to your brain specifically. The matter, cycling through it, isn't destroyed. It disperses into the environment, gets taken up by other living things, circulates through ecosystems. In some wild sense, the atoms that used to be part of your childhood brain might currently be in a tree somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. And new atoms have taken their place inside the structure we call your mind. The pattern persists. The substance has been entirely swapped. Have you died and been replaced? seamlessly, over and over again throughout your life? Or is the continuous pattern of information, the unbroken narrative of self, the thing that actually constitutes you? Here's where neuroscience enters the room and makes everything significantly more disturbing. Your sense of continuous personal identity, the feeling of being a single, unbroken experiencer moving through time, is, at least in part, a construction. Your brain assembles a narrative of selfhood that feels seamless but is actually stitched together from discrete pieces in ways that routinely fool you. Consider, you spend roughly a third of your life unconscious. Every night you lose conscious experience for hours. For significant portions of that time, during deep, non-REM sleep, there is no subjective experience happening whatsoever. No dreaming, no internal monologue, no sense of time passing. From a first-person perspective, that period simply doesn't exist. You go from lying down to waking up with no experiential bridge between them. Every morning you are reconstituted. Your brain picks back up the stored patterns, reactivates the neural signatures of your personality and memory, and within seconds assembles a functional you that seamlessly inherits the identity of the person who went to sleep. There is no way to verify from the inside that the person who woke up is the same continuous entity as the person who lay down. The memories say so, the brain structure says so, but there is no independent thread of consciousness that persisted through those hours to confirm the handoff. So, are you dying every night? Is sleep a nightly discontinuity of self? Is waking up a small resurrection? Most people find this idea silly because the person who wakes up has all the memories, all the personality, all the continuity of narrative. Of course, it's the same person, but that intuition is doing a lot of heavy lifting on behalf of a concept, personal identity through time, that doesn't hold up as cleanly as we'd like. Now let's take this further, because we've barely scratched the surface of how strange this gets. Anesthesia. If you've ever been put under for surgery, you know the experience. A countdown from 10, maybe a comment about the ceiling tiles being an odd color, and then absolute nothing. Then you're back, not in a dreamy, time-passing way, in a hard-cut way. One moment the anesthesiologist is saying something mildly reassuring, and then instantaneously, from your perspective, you're in a recovery room with a dry mouth and no awareness of any time having elapsed. During general anesthesia, the brain is not unconscious in the way sleep produces unconsciousness. The default mode network, the system responsible for self-referential thinking, your inner narrative, your sense of being a continuous self, goes quiet in a manner that has no natural analog. Neuroscientists describe it as a functional fragmentation of integrated brain activity. The neural correlates of consciousness don't dim, they decohere, and then they reassemble when the drug wears off. The person on the recovery table with memories of your whole life, your personality intact, your sense of being you fully operational, they have every functional credential to be called you. But was there a continuous thread of experience that survived the anesthesia? Or was the experiential you simply absent, and the reconstitution afterward produced a functionally identical successor? You cannot answer this from the inside. There is no inner evidence to distinguish between "I was temporarily absent and then returned," and "I ceased to exist," and "an identical experiencer was produced from the same brain state." Both scenarios feel exactly the same from a first-person perspective, which means the subjective experience of continuity proves nothing about whether continuity actually occurred. Philosophy has a name for the person on the other side of a discontinuity like this, a psychological continuant. The philosophical position called psychological continuity theory, associated most prominently with Derek Parfit, holds that personal identity over time consists in overlapping chains of psychological connections, memories, intentions, beliefs, desires, character traits. As long as these connections persist, you persist. The physical substrate matters only insofar as it maintains those psychological patterns. Parfit took this to its logical conclusion, and the destination is breathtaking. If personal identity is constituted by psychological continuity rather than physical continuity, then identity is actually not what matters. What matters is the continuation of the pattern, the psychological profile, regardless of whether the underlying entity is the same individual in any deep metaphysical sense. He illustrated this with a thought experiment, a teleporter. You step in on Earth, your body is scanned at atomic resolution, destroyed, and the information is transmitted to Mars, where your body is reconstructed from new matter. The reconstruction has all your memories, your full personality, your complete psychological profile. From its perspective, it stepped into the transporter on Earth and stepped out on Mars. Is it you? Most people's intuitions squirm here. The destruction of the original feels wrong in a way the reconstruction doesn't fix. But, and here's Parfit's knife, why? If psychological continuity is what identity consists in, the reconstruction qualifies fully. And if the physical continuity of matter is what actually matters, then you've been dying and being replaced continuously since birth, because your matter has been cycling out the entire time. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. There's no comfortable landing here. Every available answer to what makes you you has an uncomfortable edge. The many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics opens up an entirely different angle on this, and it is not for the faint of heart. In standard quantum mechanics, particles exist in superpositions of multiple states until measured, at which point the wave function collapses to a single outcome. The many worlds interpretation, proposed by Hugh Everett in 1957 and taken seriously by a significant portion of modern physicists, holds that there is no collapse. Instead, every quantum event causes reality to branch. All outcomes occur, each in a separate branch of an ever-proliferating multiverse. If this interpretation is correct, and it is debated, not fringe, then at every moment, countless versions of you branch off into different outcomes. The version reading this now is one branch among an astronomical number. Other branches diverged at every quantum fork in every atom of every neuron in your brain throughout your entire life. Are those other branches you? They started as you. They share your history up to the branching point, but from that point, they're separate experiencers having different experiences. When branching occurs, does the original cease to exist and get replaced by multiple successors, or does subjective experience somehow pick a lane? Parfit, again, he thought the branching scenario showed that identity simply isn't a well-defined thing. Not because the question is unanswerable, but because the concept doesn't carve reality at its joints. Asking which branch is really me might be like asking which grain of sand is the real beach. The question assumes a precision the underlying reality doesn't support. Let's bring this closer to home because at some point the abstract philosophy has to land somewhere personal, or it's just an intellectual exercise. You have changed, substantially. The person you were at age 7 did not have your current political views, your adult fears, your hard-won understanding of what friendship actually requires, your relationship to your own mortality, your opinions about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. The 7-year-old's personality, their understanding of themselves, their emotional world, these differ from yours today in ways that go far beyond mere maturation. If you met your 7-year-old self as a separate person, you would share memories and family history, but would find yourselves strangers in many of the ways that actually define a person. Different values, different fears, different frameworks for understanding reality. The psychological continuity between that child and you today is real but attenuated, held together by a chain of memory and gradual change, rather than any stable core. So in what sense is that child the same person you are now? And if they're not, if the degree of change is sufficient to constitute a meaningful discontinuity of identity, then have you, in some philosophically coherent sense, already replaced multiple prior versions of yourself who no longer exist? The teenager who burned with certain convictions and certainties that you now find embarrassing or simply foreign, where did they go? The beliefs dissolved. The emotional patterns shifted. The self-conception changed. The atoms departed. What exactly persisted? A name? A body? Modified beyond recognition? A set of memories that you interpret through a consciousness substantially different from the one that originally formed them. There's a condition that makes all of this viscerally, rather than abstractly, real: severe amnesia. Patients with certain forms of anterograde amnesia, the inability to form new long-term memories, live in a kind of perpetual present tense. The most documented case in neuroscience history, known as HM, had his hippocampi surgically removed to treat epilepsy, and could not form new autobiographical memories from that point forward. Every morning, he woke up with no knowledge of the preceding years. His family members aged in his experience overnight. He never knew the year. He could learn new motor skills. He got better at tasks even without remembering practicing them. But his sense of continuous self, his narrative identity, was frozen. Was HM the same person each morning? He had persistent personality traits, the same sense of humor, the same basic character, but he had no experiential continuity beyond a few minutes. Each waking was, in a meaningful sense, a fresh instantiation. Same pattern, no thread of memory connecting it to prior awakenings. This is not a hypothetical. This was a real human being experiencing, or failing to experience, an existence in which psychological continuity was fundamentally disrupted. And it forces the question, if memory is what holds the narrative of self together, and that memory is severed, is the self severed too? Are we, all of us, held together by the fragile scaffolding of an unbroken memory chain that, if interrupted sufficiently, constitutes a death of identity even while the body continues? There's a Japanese concept worth bringing in here. The idea that objects, relationships, and selves are defined by impermanence rather than despite it. The self, in many Buddhist philosophical traditions, is not a thing, not a noun, but a process, a verb, almost. Identity is not a stable entity that persists through time. It is a continuous arising. Each moment, the conditions of the previous moment give rise to the next in an unbroken causal chain, but there is no fixed thing being passed forward. Just causally connected events, arising and ceasing. In this framework, the question, "Have I already died once?" receives a different kind of answer. Not yes or no, but the premise is wrong. There was never a stable you to die. There is a stream of interdependent events causally connected, giving rise moment by moment to the experience of being someone. The self is less like a river and more like the flowing itself. This is philosophically precise, internally consistent, and absolutely the most disorienting way to brush your teeth in the morning when you make the mistake of thinking about it too hard. Now, the simulation hypothesis opens a door that's worth peering through, even if it's a little dizzying. The philosopher Nick Bostrom formalized the argument. If it's possible to run conscious simulations of minds, and if sufficiently advanced civilizations tend to run such simulations, then the number of simulated minds vastly outnumbers biological ones. Meaning, statistically, any given conscious entity is far more likely to be simulated than biological. If you are a simulated mind, your existence is implemented in computational substrate, and computational processes can be paused, copied, rolled back, and resumed. In principle, a simulation could be paused at any moment, your subjective experience simply halting mid-thought, and then resumed later, possibly after any arbitrary gap of real time. From your perspective, no gap, no discontinuity. The coffee cup in your hand didn't stop being warm. The thought you were finishing continued. But during that pause, were you dead? A process that isn't running, isn't experiencing. A computational mind with no active processing is not a mind in any functional sense, and yet the resumption would feel seamless, indistinguishable from an uninterrupted existence. If this is even a conceivable scenario, and given that we already run simulations of increasing sophistication, it is at minimum conceivable, then the very possibility means that your sense of continuous experience proves nothing about whether your existence has been interrupted. The subjective experience of continuity and the objective fact of continuity are decoupled. They can and plausibly do diverge. You cannot use the fact that you feel continuous as evidence that you are. Here's the piece that tends to rattle people once it lands. Even within a single life, with no exotic thought experiments required, the argument can be made that you have already undergone identity death and replacement multiple times. The person you were before a severe trauma, and the person you became after if you became someone meaningfully different, these might constitute distinct experiential identities connected by memory, but separated by a discontinuity of selfhood. Grief does this. Certain psychedelic experiences reportedly do this. Religious conversion, when it is total, and was historically described in exactly these terms. The old self dying, a new self arising. The metaphor of death and rebirth wasn't accidental. It was pointing at something that at least some people experience as functionally real. Recovery from certain mental illnesses involves the dissolution of an identity that organized experience in one way and the emergence of an identity that organizes experience differently. Is the person on the other side of that recovery the same person? In some ways, obviously. In others, in the ways that actually matter for what it's like to be someone, maybe not straightforwardly. Extreme sleep deprivation, high fever, dissociative episodes, severe depersonalization, all of these create states in which the sense of being a continuous self temporarily fragmentates. And returning from those states, people sometimes report a sensation of reassembly, of coming back, which implies at a minimum that the first-person experience of selfhood is not as continuous or as robust as it normally pretends to be. So, have you already died once? The framework of the question shapes the answer. If dying requires biological death, the cessation of the body's functions, the terminal halt of the brain, then no, not yet. And the question is premature. But if dying means the permanent cessation of a particular experiential identity, the end of a specific configuration of memories, personality, beliefs, and subjective perspective, then the question deserves a much more complicated response. Versions of you have ended. The 7-year-old's experiential world is over, replaced by successors who inherited the history but changed the experiencer. The person you were before a major life rupture may be gone in a way that isn't just metaphor. The nightly dissolution of consciousness and its morning reconstitution may be, depending on which philosophical framework you commit to, a small death and resurrection repeated thousands of times across your life. The matter cycling through you has, at this point, almost entirely been replaced. The pattern persists, or something like it, but the substrate carrying it is new. Whether you are the ship, or the pattern of the ship, or the history of the ship, or the name of the ship, is a question that cannot be resolved by intuition alone, because intuition was designed to navigate the middle-scale world where these distinctions don't matter practically. They matter enormously metaphysically. And here's what makes this more than an abstract puzzle. This question, what constitutes the self? What constitutes its continuity? What would end it? Sits at the root of almost every consequential ethical question humanity faces. It bears on how we think about end-of-life care for people whose personalities have been transformed by dementia. Is the person with late-stage Alzheimer's the same person who wrote an advance directive decades earlier? Do they carry the rights, the preferences, the obligations of that prior self? It applies to criminal justice. If a person who committed an act of violence 20 years ago has been, through transformation, a substantially different identity since, are we punishing the right entity? It shapes the ethics of personal identity in an era of potential mind uploading, brain-computer interfaces, and AI systems trained on individual human data to approximate a specific person's cognitive patterns. If your neural patterns were uploaded to a substrate and the biological original died, would the upload be you? Would it have your right to life, your memories, your name? These aren't distant science fiction scenarios. They are questions that will require answers within the lifetime of people alive right now, and the answer depends entirely on what we decide or discover about what personal identity actually is. The most honest conclusion this whole line of thinking arrives at is one that's simultaneously deflating and liberating. You are not as solid as you feel. The sense of being a continuous, unified, singular experiencer moving through time is a construction, a narrative your brain assembles from discontinuous pieces, filled in at the edges, smoothed over the gaps. It is a useful construction. It allows you to maintain relationships, honor commitments, learn from the past, and plan for the future. Selfhood is one of the most functional things evolution ever produced, but the sensation of solidity doesn't mean solidity exists in the way it feels like it does. You have already been multiple overlapping selves. You have crossed discontinuities of sleep, of change, of transformation, that, under rigorous examination, qualify as the ending of one version and the beginning of another. Whether that counts as dying depends on a definition of dying that nobody has cleanly settled. And yet, here you are, experiencing, wondering, making coffee on a Tuesday morning with a thought rattling around that won't quite sit still. Whatever you are, a pattern, a process, a story, a brain tells itself, a ship whose every plank has been replaced. You're here now, reading this, which means something came through, something continues. Maybe the question isn't whether you've died before. Maybe the question is what you want to do with the version of yourself that made it to today. Because if prior versions can end and successors arise without your even noticing, then the person you become from this point is, in a very real sense, someone you're actively constructing. The next version of you is being assembled right now from your habits, your choices, your attention, your commitments. Whether that's terrifying or quietly magnificent is entirely up to whoever decides to show up tomorrow morning.